name is Tom Walsh, and the fly that we're going to tie tonight will be a parachute Adams. The idea for tonight is to learn a new technique about how to tie parachute flies. So it wouldn't make any difference whether we were tying a parachute Adams or parachute sulfur or parachute green drake. A parachute fly is a generic description for a fly which imitates a mayfly done. So you can make a parachute to be almost anything you want it to be. Tonight I said we're going to be tying an Adams. I'm using gray thread. I like an 8/0 thread because it doesn't put up a lot of bulk. I'll be using, there's several different dubbings here that different people can choose from. We'll be using a piece of a rabbit zonker, just to use rabbit dubbing. We'll be using a piece of needloft yarn, which is, you can get that at Walmart. It's also called punch yarn. So you want something that is not a real soft yarn. You want something that's sort of coarse. For a tail, you use any number of things for a tail. There's some little things that are called microfibets, which are very thin monofilament for tying things. You can use a guard hair off of a coarse. This is a groundhog. It's got some coarse guard hairs. You don't want to include the soft underfur. You want to pull the guard hairs out. Something that I've been using a lot of lately is paintbrush bristles. You have to make sure that the paintbrush bristles are of the quality that you want for a tail. And I like to use Cree hackle because it's barred and it gives a little bit of suggestion of movement. And that's pretty much all of our materials. I'm going to start out and put in a tail. And what I'll do here is pull out about 3 or 4 bristles out of this brush. Trim them off. One of the nice things about these are called chip brushes, and they come with a natural bristle. And nice thing about that is that you can dye them almost any color you want. I've got one that's dyed here that's it's olive, and one that's natural. We can tie them gray. You can tie them almost any color that you like to dye.
What kind of dyes do you use?
You can use Rit dye. Rit dye will work, that you get in a grocery store. I've got a lot of dyes that I've used to dye feathers. Feathers are a little harder to dye than cloth, but these seem to dye up pretty well. I'm going to tie the tails on first, and by tying the tails on first, that gives me a little bit easier time to tie the wing on. Now I tie the tail on, and then I bring the thread back on the shank to about halfway between the point of the hook and the eye of the hook. Now what I'll do is I'll take a piece of this yarn, and as it comes, it's got two strands of yarn in it. You want to separate those 2 strands out because you don't need that much yarn. But you take it and bind the yarn down on the hook. Then hold the yarn up. Grab it with your other hand, in my case, my left hand, and then bind it down in the front so that you have a nice little loop that's right there in the center of the hook. Now, what I've done here is I've made a loop. I've gotten a lot of yarn up here at the top, but I've got the yarn split so that you will not take so much yarn up and make a very bulky body. So this is one of the things about mayflies. Mayflies have very delicate bodies, and a lot of the suggestions to use calf tail and other kinds of hair to make the wing, it just makes such a very thick, heavy body that it doesn't look real natural. So what I've done now is I've taken the thread and palmered the thread down on both ends of the yarn, and I've made a very neat, thin body, simply because I didn't use a lot of yarn to make the wing. That look okay? Okay, now, once I get the thread on the hook, what I'll do is I'll come back and start to wrap the thread around the post. Now I do this because I'm going to put some glue on the post to reinforce the post. You want to bring this thread up about 1/8 of an inch, a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch. Come back down and tie it off. Now, we do that because what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the hackle on the post, and we're going to finish the fly on the post. Now, most parachutes are done where you wrap the fly and then you come up to the head and finish off up by the eye. My problem was always that I kept getting hackles caught in the threads, and then you bind them down and you couldn't get a real nice, neat looking head. Okay, so we're going to do this just a little bit differently tonight, and you'll see how much easier it is. Now at this point, I always put a half hitch in this. It's a little more difficult because I tried to butcher my finger last week. Normally I use my index finger. At this point, you take some head cement, preferably the thin variety, and you put just a whole bunch on that body. And you give it a couple of seconds so that it has a chance to soak in. The other option to this is that you make up a bunch of bodies up to this point. And you just clip off the thread and put them over on the side and wait for the glue to dry. We don't have that luxury tonight because we got to move on. But because I put that half hitch in there, this thread is not going to come loose. Okay? Now, the next thing we want to do is to dub the body. And like I said, I'm going to be using some rabbit fur here. I've got some different antrons in my bag. If somebody wants to use antron, they can use antron. If they want to use some, muskrat fur would be a good fur to use. Keep in mind, I've always said that you can always put on more dubbing, but you have a difficult time taking off. So when you dub your thread, you want to dub your thread just ever so lightly. Essentially what you want to do is to make a fuzzy thread. And so many people want to really load that thread up so they don't have to make so many wraps when they make the body of the fly. I'd much rather come back and redo the body a couple of times and not have to take dubbing off. You just simply dub the body just like you wrap the body up like you normally would. come up to the post, jump over to the front, bring it back. At this point, we'll bring this around. Now here's where we're going to depart from the typical parachute fly. Typically what happens now is the tire will tie the hackle onto the post, okay? And then you got to wrap the hackle around it in this fashion, which for most people is an uncomfortable manipulation to make because you've changed the axis of how you're wrapping your hackle. But if you simply take your hook, loosen it in a vise, turn it 90 degrees, tighten it down again. Now you're going to be wrapping the hackle in a direction that you're used to wrapping hackle. Most people find it much more comfortable to do it that way. Now, like I say, we're going to finish off the hackle on the post. So that's the last thing we're going to be doing. If you take your hackle and spread out the fibers and trim the fibers back, you want to trim them with the scissors, because when you trim them with the scissors, you leave all these little short stubs left, and that'll act as an anchor. So once you put this hackle onto the fly and you wrap it in, those little stubs will keep it from slipping out.
That's the butt end.
That's the butt end. Now you want to have enough of those stubs to where you can make about 3 wraps. This is particularly true in conventional catskill type flies. You want to make about 3 wraps before the long hackle start to show up. And what that does is it gives your fly a chance, your hackle a chance to orient on the fly. And then it'll come out flat. And you start wrapping. See, and the way I'm wrapping now is just the way that you would be used to wrapping a regular style fly. And most people will find it much more comfortable to do that. Now, you just saw my problem here with my soft loop here. And it was trying to come undone. And that will be eliminated if you put the head cement on it and then let it sit until it dries. And then it'll be much harder and much more rigid of a post. Then you finish the fly off at the top of your wraps. You don't go back to the hook, because if you go back to the hook, then you're wrapping all those fibers together. So you finish off at the top of the wraps, right underneath your post. And with the exception of putting a little bit of glue on it, you're finished. Now you'll eventually want to cut that post off. Typically, I'll just put the fly in my fly box and then trim it on the stream. But parachute ad bumps.